This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
The return of a friend with an invitation and another visit to the moon, this time in the company of Bishop Tricia. That's all on the programme today. Plus, of course, music. And we're starting with a hymn to celebrate, a little belatedly, St David's Day, because yesterday, March the 1st, was the feast of the patron saint of Wales. So what better than a much-loved Welshman and a Welsh hymn tune? Remembering Sir Harry Seacombe and Guide Me, O Thy Great Redeemer, the tune Cumronda by John Hughes with words by William Williams, known as the most famous hymn writer of Welsh Methodism. When the Museum of the Moon art installation arrived in early February, I felt it would be on display for ages, but the weeks have flown by and now I find myself saying that today, March the 2nd, is the final day when you can walk into the Cathedral in Peel and see this fantastic scale representation of the moon that has drawn over 17,000 visitors since it arrived. If you're planning to visit today, you'll be made most welcome. There's no booking or tickets needed and dogs on leads are welcome too. The service this morning that's starting at 10:30 will finish around 12 noon. And then there's a Songs of Praise, open to everyone, this afternoon at 3:30 and lasting for about an hour. You're welcome to come into the cathedral whilst a service is taking place. We just ask that you avoid the area where the congregation will be seated, unless, of course, you'd like to join in the service, which you're very welcome to do. At 7 o'clock tonight, there'll be the first showing of a new short film, just about 17 minutes, all about the cathedral from ancient origins to the present reordering. And this will be followed at 7:30 by a 10-minute display of ballroom dancing by British champions. After this, the remainder of the evening will be a quiet night in a darkened cathedral, and the Museum of the Moon and the cathedral will close with a short service of Compline tonight at 9 o'clock.
Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night. So great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings. So may we come to rest where angels sing.
Luke Jerram, the artist who created this amazing installation, said he called it the Museum of the Moon because he wants it to inspire thoughts and feelings that'll be kept and treasured. Bishop Tricia has been in the Museum of the Moon several times, and on one evening visit she took part in a group sharing thoughts on darkness and light. And she joins us now to tell us more on that same theme. Bishop Tricia, good morning and welcome.
Oh, lovely to be with you. Good morning.
The Museum of the Moon, it's the final day of this incredible art installation that's been in the cathedral over the last 3 weeks. Thousands of people have come through. It's obviously touched lots of people.
Oh, I think it's stunning. And I think the new look of the cathedral is just so perfect, and the acoustic in there. It's such a perfect space for it. So I've enjoyed being there a great deal, and for all kinds of different things. So whether that's been a gathering like we had recently as we were thinking together about some of the theological impacts of the moon and what it is to be part of the creation, or whether it was doing Pilates under the moon as I was one Saturday recently, which was just such great fun.
When you were reflecting on the theology, what was it that you were reflecting on?
It was actually a two-part opportunity which we called Walking in the Dark Towards the Light. And the piece that I was particularly exploring was our understanding of darkness, and actually how we often tend to flee from dark, and we like to turn the lights on as much as we can and to blot out the dark, which we tend to think of as either just empty space, or it reminds us of all those nursery tales that there may have been monsters under the bed in the dark. And we were asking, actually, how do you walk confidently in the dark? And that might be a metaphor for all kinds of things in our lives. And I started, in a way, with a poem I love by Ted Hughes, and it's called Full Moon and Little Frida. And it really describes one of Ted Hughes' own daughter, and he describes her being out at night with a pail of water, looking at the reflection of the moon in the water in the pail. And there's a moment when he describes her, "Moon," you cry suddenly, "Moon, moon." And the moon has stepped back like an artist, gazing amazed at a work that points at him amazed. So for us, it was that moment of stopping to point amazed at the moon in the darkness, and to wonder what we might find for good and that would fill us with awe in that space. I'm conscious that there are things that I've said, actually, I've only ever discovered in the darkness. And that might be physical darkness. So I was talking about being in Turkey and the darkest of nights and suddenly seeing this glow out to sea. And it turned out to be phosphorescent algae. And I could only have seen that at that moment in the dark. Or swimming in a cave in the darkest of waters in Bolivia, and there was no natural light in the cave at all, and only a tiny torch that we had with us. And as I swam, I couldn't help after a while thinking, I wonder what else might be in this cave that I can't see. And there was both a thrill and a slight dread. And I think that's often how we feel in those times we often put the label dark to in life. Actually, what are the things we can only discover when life might seem a little darker? And actually, there are still treasures to be found in the dark. And I believe some of that treasure is of God. One of the things I reflected on under the moon in the cathedral was that sense of the hidden treasures, and even just observing that for many years, it was only in 1959 that we had the first spacecraft take photographs of the other side of the moon. So for millennia, our ancestors looked up at the same moon we look up at, but only saw one side of it. And suddenly, with the Soviet spacecraft going round the other side of the moon, a whole part of the hiddenness of our cosmic twin was revealed. And I think there's a sense in which God reveals more of God in some of our dark times, and there are hidden things to go looking for, both in ourselves and in God. And there's a lovely biblical quote from the scriptures which talks of treasures in the darkness. And just as you were saying, Judith, that sense of what is it we learn about the God who is faithful, the God who is there and present and active. I've enjoyed looking at some of the scriptural elements of God working in the dark. And the beginning of creation, we often think of the "let there be light" statement of God, but it began in a darkness where there was the world without form, is the beautiful poetic story of the beginning. So it was in the darkness that word, "let there be light," was spoken. So you needed both, it feels to me. And later, thinking of the story of Jesus, that actually in the darkness of that night above Bethlehem, that's where the sky was suddenly full with angels and the song echoed. Later, he was on the cross, and those 3 hours of darkness, that's where our salvation was wrought. Hours before, in the darkness of Gethsemane, he had prayed and he'd chosen to take that path. And then in the darkness of the tomb, that's where the final victory was won. So that thread of actually God being almost doing God's best work in the dark as much as in the light. I remember it the first time being somewhere where it was so dark outside, but the moon was shining so brightly that I encountered my own moon shadow. And those are things we forget. We're so used to our shadow during the day, but the light, the transforming light of the moon can be really profound. And for many millennia as well, the moon would have been our brightest light that our forebears would have been able to draw on. If they'd wanted to travel, they would have been mostly in the darkest of nights, but the moon was their friend.
This source of light, we can look at it. There is a relationship that we can form with it. We can't look at the sun. We can see what the sun does, but we can't look at it. We can't have that same kind of relationship.
I think that's a really important and interesting thing to focus on, about the connectivity and the relationship between us and the moon and us and one another. The origins of the moon are actually lost in who knows. But the hypothesis put forward by 2 American astronomers is that there was the early Earth and that it was hit by an object the size of Mars, perhaps. And in that terrible cataclysm, the new object the size of Mars and the old proto-Earth combined to create our Earth, and that the remnant was spun out into space and became this twin, our moon, with whom we're in this great cosmic dance surrounding our same star. And then the light of the sun obviously reflects onto the moon and reflects back to us. But actually the moon is also lit by light that hits the earth and hits the moon and then is reflected back to us. So this light is in this dance, this cosmic dance going to and fro, and we're held in this great relationship. And of course we know that actually life couldn't survive as it does without our relationship with the moon. That, not only we live on an island, we're used to the tides and the effect of the moon in terms of that. But I was really struck to learn that even the rocks of the earth are tugged by that same gravitational pull, and we bulge as earth towards the moon all the time. So that relationship is really significant.
I think, if nothing else, if we take away from this time that we have had under the moon, and the time we had last year when we had Gaia in St. Thomas's, where we had the earth for us to wonder at and reflect on, if nothing else, if we take away the sense of First of all, our dependence on everything else that is seen and unseen around us, and our dependence on each other. If that is all we take away from it, it will be a little step in the right direction, won't it?
It will. And I think we learn from one another. That's been one of my joys of being around in the space of the cathedral, and a huge gratitude to the Arts Council for their support and help of making that happen. But that sense of seeing how other people are relating to what's happening there really is building community. It's building that sense of relationship. And I began by quoting that piece from Full Moon and Little Frida from Ted Hughes, but actually on Saturday after Pilates, just seeing some of the children come in, and as soon as they got through the door, standing and pointing, little toddlers, and just their whole bodies been riven with excitement, and their parents being so glad. Or the 3 young girls, young teenagers who came in, very late at night as we were all packing up after our conversation under the moon, and just their whole body encounter with that space. And I think that's about us being connected, about how we're brought together by something that's bigger than us and so powerful. And for me, of course, speaks of the God who draws us together and brings us together.
Thank you, Bishop Tricia, looking at the spiritual significance of darkness and light. On the church calendar, this coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, the first day of the season called Lent, a period of 40 days leading up to the great celebration of Easter, a time that's been described as spring cleaning our lives for God. To give us a bit of help to do this, Bishop Tricia has prepared a series of 6 little talks, one for each of the weeks of Lent, called Conversations with Jesus. These will be available as weekly podcasts starting next Sunday, and you can subscribe for free and download them via manxradio.com, just as you do for all our other podcasts. Each podcast will be made up of some music, a Bible reading and a reflection on the reading, with some suggestions of how that might relate to our own life. And of course, all the podcasts remain available indefinitely, so you can listen whenever it's convenient for you. Bishop Tricia's Conversations with Jesus podcast for Lent will be available at manxradio.com from next Sunday onwards. But there's something new that's available right now that I think you might enjoy. And here's a familiar voice from the adjacent island to tell you all about it.
Hello there, it's Richard Littledale here, and I'm taking a few strides across the sea from North Wales to visit my friends over there on the Isle of Man. It's become a very special place to me, and this programme has become a very special place to me too, as has its host. And that host of yours and mine, Judith, encouraged me recently to think about putting my writing and broadcasting skills to use in a new way. And that's how the Bespoke Words podcast was born. Over the next few weeks, I shall be talking on this little podcast for 15 minutes every week about a subject that is close to all our hearts. Friendship. How do we make friends? How do we keep them? What does God have to say about them? And how can we celebrate all the fun that we have along the way? I'll be talking through some of the history and the philosophy, if you like, of friendship, and I'll also be introducing you to some voices from my local coffee shop, where people have some interesting thoughts in completing the sentence, "To me, a friend is." Come to think of it, I wonder how you would respond to that. What would you say if I asked you right here at your service to complete that sentence, "To me, a friend is"? Maybe you can send your responses into the programme, but I'd love you to come and visit me here on the podcast. You can find it in all the places where you would usually listen to a podcast. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Podbean, all sorts of other places too. Come along and find me. There'll be a new episode for you every Friday, 15 minutes to think about friendship. So come and join me if you can on the Bespoke Word podcast.
Cariwch medd Dafydd fy nhelyn I mi. Ceisiaf cyn marw'r hoeton arni. Codwch fy nwylo I gyrraedd y tad. Diwach bendithio fy ngweddw am blant. Neithiwr mi glywais lais angel fel hyn. Dafydd tirna dref a chwarae trwy'r glyn. Delyn fy mebyd ffarwel I dy dat. Diwach bendithio fy ngweddw am blant. Angel choirs call to me, David, come home, forever to join with the music of heaven. Fading to silence the sounds I adore. Songs loud and high I'll play evermore. Songs on high I'll play evermore.
Some more music, this time from Aled Jones, celebrating the patron saint of Wales, David of the White Rock. And before that, Richard Littledale invited you to try his brand new podcast about friendship. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms. Just search for Bespoke Words. And now let's take a look at this week's notice board, which is packed with information. And we begin with a reminder that the Mariners Choir is in Kirk Christ, a Russian parish church, tonight at 6:30 for a service led by Reverend Canon Joe Heaton and followed as usual by supper and community hymn singing. The soloist in the service is Sarah Qualtrough. There's a lot happening in the Abbey Church in Ballasalla, starting this afternoon with Maloo Parish Commissioner's Civic Sunday service. That's this afternoon at 3:00 in the Abbey Church in Ballasalla. Methodist, Roman Catholic and Anglican clergy will be involved, and there'll be music from the Glen Faber Chorale. And then the Abbey Church in Ballasalla is the venue for two special events for the start of Lent. The first is on Tuesday the 4th. That's Shrove Tuesday, and there'll be pancakes in the Abbey Church Hall between 3:30 and 5:00, along with children's activities, hot and cold drinks, and if you don't like pancakes, Reverend Ruth says we can make toast. All ages are welcome. Then on Wednesday the 5th, in the Abbey Church in Ballasalla at 12 noon, there'll be a short service for Ash Wednesday. Reverend Ruth says this will help us begin our journey through Lent towards Easter. All are welcome, even if you're not sure what Ash Wednesday is and would just like to come along and find out. And on Thursday the 6th, Lent lunches begin in the Cool Chapel Hall on Cool Road in Braddon at the top of the Isle of Man Business Park. Served between noon and 2 p.m. every Thursday, homemade soups and desserts followed by tea or coffee for a suggested donation of £7. And all proceeds will be divided between the local charity Stand Up to Suicide and Tear Fund working in South Sudan. And St Thomas's Church, just off the promenade near the Gaiety Theatre here in Douglas, invite you to their Lent lunches, which begin this week and will be served every Friday between noon and 1:30 throughout Lent. And the money raised will be used for a defibrillator to be sited in St Thomas's Church. Friday the 7th is also World Day of Prayer. The service, prepared by the Christian women of the Cook Islands, will be used, translated into many different languages, at services all around the world, uniting us all in a time of prayer, reflection and song. Everyone's welcome, and there are ecumenical services all over the island. The service for the South is in Colby Methodist Church on Friday at 11 a.m, and Arbury school children will be singing at the start of the service. Refreshments will be available in the Coffee Lounge in Colby Methodist Church from 10 a.m, and there'll be a fair trade table. Kirkmichael Parish is holding a service for the World Day of Prayer on Friday at 2 p.m. in Michael Parish Church. And a World Day of Prayer service will take place in St Ninian's Church on Glencrutchery Road here in Douglas on Friday at 7 p.m. And the service in the north will be in St Paul's Church in Ramsey on Friday evening at 7:30 and will be followed by refreshments. The next meeting of the Island Spirituality Network will be held on Saturday the 8th in St John's Mill from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. The speaker this month is Reverend Chris Howson, chaplain at Sunderland University, and his theme will be the spirituality of Taizé and the hope of reconciliation. It was in the deeply painful aftermath of the Sunderland riots last summer that Chris found solace at Taizé and was able to recenter himself. Taizé is the ecumenical monastic community in southern France, established after the Second World War and dedicated to praying continuously for world peace. The Island Spirituality Network draws together people of all faiths and none. Everyone is most welcome. That's at St John's Mill this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. And finally, looking ahead to next Sunday, the 9th, Ballafesson Methodist Chapel in Port Erin have a sacrament service starting at 10:30 with Reverend Chris Belfield. And the Mariners are out again next Sunday night at 6:30, this time in Peel Methodist Church, when the preacher will be Reverend Brian Yardy. And that's all we have time for now, but I'll be back tonight at 9, waiting to open the door to our virtual lounge and welcome you in for a mix of all kinds of music, plus your requests and dedications, and a lot more notice board news. And I'd love you to join me if you can. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a safe, happy and peaceful week, and a very good morning.